Welcome to Lesson 12 on ordering and transferring controlled substances. In this lesson, we'll be covering pages 68 through 73 in your book. We're still in Chapter 2 on controlled substances. So we're going to start with ordering Schedule 2 controlled substances, and we're going to talk about the manual process to do this using the actual paper form. This can also be done electronically using the Seesaw system, and we'll cover that in just a moment. But I do think it's important that you know how to do this manually because there's a lot of details here, and they could definitely ask questions on how you do this through the DEA Form 222. So remember, the DEA Form 222 is required really for every transfer of a Schedule 2 controlled substance from one registrant to another. And that could be from the manufacturer to the wholesaler, from the wholesaler to the pharmacy, from a pharmacy to a reverse distributor. All these, whenever a Schedule 2 controlled bulk substance bottle is going to be sent from one registrant to another, it has to be done with a DEA 222 form. There are lots of rules surrounding the DEA 222 form, such as it's only one item can be ordered on each line. So you fill out the form and you put what you want to order on each line. And at the bottom, you got to put how many lines you filled in. You can't make any alterations or erasure marks on the form, otherwise it can't be filled. There's some oddball rules that, and I hope they never get into something like this on the MPJE, but who knows. The drugs Atorphine and Diprenorphine can only contain orders for those substances. I think those products are like animal tranquilizers, so but apparently because they're so potent, they have to be done on a separate form. But like, as I said, you have to fill out the number of lines completed, so we know that nobody could go in and add something on later on. And you actually put the name and the address of the person or the supplier who's going to provide you the controlled substances, and you send them the form. The form obviously has to be signed. So who can sign the 222 form? So only the registrant can sign the 222 form. Well, remember who the registrant was. If it was a corporation, it's an officer of the corporation, or if it's an individual, it's an individual. If it's a partnership, it's the partner. In real life, that may not happen, so you may have to have a power of attorney from a corporate officer in order to be authorized to sign these 222 forms. So this is similar to the power of attorney used to register every 3 years. That one's got to be sent to DEA. This power of attorney from the actual registrant, from the corporate officer, would authorize a pharmacist or maybe even a technician to order Schedule 2 controlled substances. Because it doesn't have to be a pharmacist. There's a misconception. A lot of people think the person who signs the DEA 222 form has to be a pharmacist. It can actually be a technician. You should know the details of this power of attorney, that it's got to be signed by two witnesses, and you can also revoke somebody's power to sign the 222 forms, and all these have to be kept in your pharmacy. You don't have to send these to DEA. Is there a limit on how many people you can grant authority to sign the 222 forms? No. You can have power of attorneys for 2 or 3 people, and you may want to in case somebody's on vacation and you need to order Schedule 2 controlled substances. You may need multiple people to order the Schedule 2s. And as I mentioned before, it doesn't necessarily have to be a pharmacist. It could be a technician or anyone else working in the pharmacy. As I mentioned, the forms can't have any alterations or erasure marks or anything. If they are, the supplier really should not accept that particular order form. When a supplier receives your 222 form and they prepare the drugs to be sent to you, they could send a partial quantity. Let's say you ordered 6 bottles of a Schedule 2 drug and they don't have the full quantity. They could send you a partial quantity, but they only have 60 days then to complete the rest of that order. After 60 days, the order form becomes null and void, and you would have to reissue another order. There's also a procedure to follow if you send a form into, let's say, your wholesaler, and they never receive it, so the form is lost or stolen, because all these forms have a serial number on them. You have to prepare another form and track it back to the original serial number of the lost form, so they know that the original one was lost. So DEA transitioned from a triplicate 222 form to a single copy 222 form a few years ago. The triplicate form would require a copy be sent to DEA so they can know which drugs are transferred from one registrant to another. However, most wholesalers already report to DEA all their transactions involving Schedule II controlled substances, so there really wasn't a need to send those paper forms in and have a triplicate copy of the form anymore. But part of that triplicate form, one of the copies was kept in the pharmacy, so you could record what was received into your pharmacy after you sent the order to the supplier. You still have to record what's received in your pharmacy, so therefore, with this single 222 form, the purchaser, the person who wants to receive the drugs, has to make a copy of the DEA Form 222. And then you send the original copy to your supplier who's going to send you the 222 forms. One thing to remember about ordering Schedule II controlled substances is who fills out the form is the person who wants to receive the drug. So if I'm a pharmacy and I want to order Schedule II drugs, I fill out my own DEA 222 forms, which are pre-printed with my pharmacy name, my address, my DEA number, and I send it to whichever supplier I want to provide it. But the person who wants the drugs is the person who initiates and fills out the 222 form. When the supplier receives the form, they fill out the side of the form with the number of containers or bottles that they're sending and the date that they sent it on the original form, and they will electronically report that to the DEA through a system called ARCOS, which is the electronic reporting system that a lot of wholesalers and manufacturers use. When you, as the purchaser, receive the Schedule II controlled substances, you record on the copy that you made the number received and the date received. Now, a question I often get is, does the pharmacist also have to put his or her initials on that DEA 222 form as the person who received the drug? The regulation says you only have to put the number received and the date. A lot of people will also initial it so they know who the person was that received it. And I've heard DEA tell people they recommend that, but going by the actual words of the regulations, it only has a space there for the number of containers received and the date that it was received. So you'll see on page 70, as I mentioned earlier, most suppliers like wholesalers are already required to report where Schedule IIs that they distribute to DEA. Schedule IIs and some Schedule IIIs and Schedule IVs through this system called ARCOS. So that's why DEA no longer requires a physical copy to be sent to them, and they got rid of the triplicate. If, however, you as a pharmacy probably don't participate in the ARCOS program because you're not normally distributing controlled substances, but as a pharmacy, we'll cover this a little bit later, you may be involved in distributing Schedule II controlled substances, let's say to another pharmacy or to a physician's office for use in their office or something like that. You would have to notify DEA of that transfer of Schedule II controlled substances, and since you're not reporting to ARCOS, you would have to do that through email, and they actually have a specific email that DEA set up. I think it's called DEA order forms at usdoj.gov or something like that. It's listed for you in the book on page 70. So that's the manual process to order a Schedule II controlled substance. A lot of pharmacies have moved to an electronic ordering system, and that's called the CSAW system. And we will start that on the next page. So electronic ordering of Schedule II controlled substances, it's through a system called the Controlled Substance Ordering System, or CSOS is the terminology that's used. Every pharmacy that's going to participate in this program has to have a CSOS coordinator. That's the recognized person who handles all the issues and handles all the digital certificates that are issued under that registration that allows people to basically digitally sign these orders. So it's like a digital version of the DEA 222 form. Now, in order to do this, your software has got to be approved and audited by a DEA authorized auditing company. And anytime you make a change to your software system has to be audited and approved to make sure that there's no chance of somebody getting into the system and diverting controlled substances. The security with the CSOS system relies on digital certificates that are used to digitally sign orders. Remember, however, they're not going to issue you a digital signing certificate to sign these forms unless you have a power of attorney if you're not the actual registrant. So that power of attorney rule still applies even when we're doing electronic Schedule II controlled substance orders. These electronic Schedule II orders can be rejected for any reason, and some of the reasons are listed for you on page 71, and that would invalidate the order. If the order cannot be filled for any reason whatsoever, the supplier has to notify the purchaser and provide a statement as to the reason why the order was not accepted. Now, no matter the reason that the order was rejected, the order can no longer be filled. It becomes invalidated, and you can't fix whatever the problem was and try and resubmit that order. Once an order is not accepted from the system, you have to reissue another order, and what you have to do is you actually have to electronically link the rejection statement you got from the non-acceptance order from the previous order must be electronically linked in your system to the new order, so they can see that this is a completely separate order and you had to reorder it because the first one was not accepted. And that's listed for you on the bottom of page 71 and the top of page 72. So now when it comes to ordering Schedule 3 through 5 controlled substances, it's a lot easier. There's not a special form. You can order Schedule 3 through 5 controlled substances just like you order your regular non-controlled substance inventory. But the documentation that's required by DEA, there still must be documentation. They want to know where these controlled substances went and how many went and what date that they went and who they went to. And the documentation to do that is called an invoice. Now, it's called an invoice, but DEA doesn't really care if you're charging for it, because normally we associate invoices with a bill that has to be paid, and it may be used for both purposes. But to DEA doesn't care about the reimbursement part. They want an invoice to track how many bottles of this drug went from this DEA registrant, the wholesaler, to this pharmacy, or went from this pharmacy to this doctor's office. So anytime you're going to transfer controlled substances to another registrant or receive a controlled substance from another registrant, there's got to be an invoice. You need to know what the elements of that invoice has to contain, and that's listed for you on page 72. The name of the controlled substance, the dosage form and strength, the number of units per container, the quantity that's received, the date it was received, and the name, address, and DEA number of where the controlled substance came from. And I do recommend you memorize that list of what's required to be on the invoice. So I mentioned earlier, when you're ordering Schedule II controlled substances, the person who wants to receive the drugs fills out the form, the 222 form. It's kind of opposite with the Schedule 3 through 5. The invoice is provided by the person sending the drugs. So you should get an invoice when the drugs are received containing all this information, except for the date of the receipt. You're going to have to fill in the date it was received. And again, if you want to initial that, you can as well. But the date and quantity received too. If the quantity on the invoice is different than what you received, you should indicate how many you actually received and the date it was received, just like you do on the DEA 222 form. So we've been talking about transferring controlled substances from one registrant to another. But as a pharmacy, you are a dispenser. Your main business is not actually transferring controlled substances to other DEA registrants. Your main business activity as a dispenser is dispensing controlled substances pursuant to valid prescriptions. But DEA realizes that many pharmacies are going to have to do some limited distributions of controlled substances. So a distribution of controlled substances from one registrant to another, but a dispensing of the controlled substances is from a pharmacy to the ultimate user. So they're two different concepts. So instead of requiring every pharmacy to also be registered as a distributor, because remember there's a separate type of registration for distributors, DEA came up with what's called the 5% rule. And it allows a pharmacy to transfer controlled substances from their pharmacy to another pharmacy or to a distributor or to a physician's office or some other DEA registrant, as long as it's not more than 5% of the business that they do with controlled substances. And the way you calculate this is you take the total quantity by dosage units of controlled substances that the pharmacy dispenses and distributes. So anything that was sent out of your pharmacy through a prescription or sent out of your pharmacy to another pharmacy or to a physician's office, the total quantity of controlled substances. The book says during a 12-month period, this is letter C1 in your book, make a correction there. They've changed the 12-month period to an actual calendar year, which actually makes a lot more sense. When it used to be a 12-month period, I always like, how do you know it's a rolling 12-month period when you're going to exceed the number? But it's actually done by calendar year now, and they changed the language. So change 12-month period in letter C1 on page 72 to calendar year. And I got it correct in the slide here. So anyway, you take the total number of controlled substances that are both dispensed and distributed in the calendar year, and then you take the total number in the calendar year that you distributed only, and that can't be more than 5%. So the numerator would be the number you distributed, the denominator would be the amount you distributed plus the amount you dispensed. And hopefully, as a pharmacy, the denominator is pretty big because you're dispensing more than you are actually distributing, and you don't come anywhere close to the 5%. If you exceed 5% during the calendar year, DEA will then require you to be registered as a distributor and not just a pharmacy. So I included an example in your book there on the bottom of page 72. Now remember, anytime you do a transfer of controlled substances from your pharmacy under this 5% rule, you do have to have the proper record keeping requirements, and that is either a DEA 222 form from the person who's going to receive the drugs, or you have to create an invoice for any Schedule 3 through 5 drugs that are going to leave your pharmacy. Okay, that's it for lesson 12. We'll be back on lesson 13 to start talking about some additional requirements for controlled substances.